Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. This is the third episode in a new series we are doing all about GP upgrades and some of the decisions and actions that GP users are looking at as they examine the future of their ERP systems. I'm joined once again, this time by Karen Riordan of Menlo Technologies and Peter Joeckel of TurnOnDynamics. Today we will be making the case for different scenarios and different outcomes when it comes to the future of a GP solution. Business Central is obviously one path, but so are options like cloud hosting. We'll talk about some of the unique reasons why GP customers are motivated for a change today, what their outlook is on cloud hosting, whether they should care about multi-tenancy or not, and how GP users are educating themselves about things like the intelligent cloud and how to evaluate Business Central. Okay, Karen Riordan, Peter Joeckel, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Jason.
Hello, Jason. Pleasure to be with you again today. Hi, Karen.
Hey, Peter. How are you?
Another day in paradise.
Won't it be fun when we all get to do this together in person?
Yeah, Jason has made his house available.
I've done very few podcasts all live in person with the same, mic set up and the same, looking face to face. It's been really a long time. So we'll definitely have to find a time to do that when conditions allow it. So we're going to try to continue our conversation from the last two that we've had, talking about upgrade strategies for, primarily Dynamics GP current customers. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of positioning for where they go next. Talking to Microsoft, it's Business Central, and it's a fairly straightforward decision, they hope, for most GP customers who decide that they need to move to the cloud. But, you two have both made the case that it's not necessarily that simple of a decision and that there are several things to consider. Who wants to kind of start things off here by just maybe summarizing a little bit of how we got to this point in the conversation? Because from here, we're going to go into really a little more detailed look at some of the decision points and some of the options that GP customers have.
Karen, you want me to take a shot at this?
Yeah, Peter, you go first. Thank you.
All righty. Yeah, thank you. So, the entire thought behind this podcast series was when Karen and I started talking. We've had this conversation about various, doings in the Dynamics market space. And we're both longtime Great Plains partners. And our companies kind of went in a little bit different directions, where Karen, I think, you were more of what I would call a classical GP partner. You maintain the GP, product line, and were one of the first folks that was aggressively moved into the BC line, and still have some Solomon folks and all that good stuff. Whereas my path took me from the Great Plains to the AX and then D365 world. And so we started talking about how we see the Great Plains space and the move to BC. And what was interesting is that we had a lot of different thoughts and things that were different based on our viewpoints of where the market was based on, where our companies were. But the thing that we agreed on was that if we take a look at the current marketing that we see to Great Plains customers, especially on-premise customers, in relation to the BC from, Microsoft, is that GP customers, if they want to be in the cloud, then the natural move for them is, hey, let's quote unquote upgrade to Business Central because that's how you get to the cloud. And the more you and I talked about this, is really obvious that, we're both looking at this in the same way, that, that simple message of got GP, here's the answer, is that there's a lot more nuance behind the scenes and really a lot of things that people should consider. And so we thought there was a lot of information that we could get out there for, business owners, business managers that are sitting on top of their GP. And we're trying to make that decision of, when, how, whatever to upgrade or move to the cloud. And so I think our first podcast, we kind of took a look at that this wasn't just a simple, linear discussion, and that there were, more things that, that you should consider. And then in our second podcast, I believe we talked a little bit about the different decisions, that we see, where we see the decision tree being a little bit more focused. And that thing that we really focused on in that second podcast was, hey, why are you upgrading, right? Has anybody asked you the question of why, or is it just, oh, we're going to, move, we're just going to upgrade because we see the marketing literature from our partner or from Microsoft? And one of the things that, is really obvious to us is that if that question is asked and the answer is, we want to move, upgrade, whatever you want to call it, because we want to be in the cloud. And whatever reason there is, right? There's multiple reasons why people want to be in the cloud, and we can get into that a little bit. But if the decision is, why do you want to upgrade, is we want to get to the cloud, then that we don't think there's one answer, which is take your on-premise GP and move it to BC. We think there's a bunch of different opportunities that you could explore that may be more cost-effective, may make more sense, right? And so what we're looking at on this, this particular podcast after those first two is, okay, your reason for doing an upgrade to your current GP on-premise, software is because you want to be in the cloud. And so the podcast today answers the question from our standpoint, now what?
Yeah, Peter, I think you did a really good job summarizing that. And I believe that if we all were talking about this 4 or 5 months ago, we could have never imagined where we would be. And moving to the cloud, being in the cloud has become something that everyone is talking about. And the cloud, as you described it, comes in lots of different flavors. And Business Central, or BC, is just one of those.
Yeah. And, one of the things, Karen and Jason, one of the things I always think about is what does the cloud actually mean to people, right? I think we're in the industry, so we kind of have an understanding, of what it actually is. But I think for a lot of, people, that are busy running their actual businesses, maybe the cloud is like this mystical thing that nobody really understands. And, at the end of the day, if you're running your on-premise GP, what you probably have is a server, right, that's sitting in some closet somewhere that you try to keep people out of. And there's this rat's nest of wires coming out of the back of it. And you're deathly afraid that anybody unplugs one of those wires because nothing will ever work again, right? And the interesting thing is that being in the cloud just means that server is in somebody else's closet, right? And you're accessing it remotely. And the funny part about it is, right, obviously their closets are much more sophisticated. And the thing that I find really entertaining is that for the vast majority of Great Plains clients that we've ever implemented, what they do is they have their on-premise solution, and then the owner or manager or somebody, that's needs to access the system from home. We set up, something simple like RDP, remote desktop protocol, right? And those people are accessing their Great Plains from home or on vacation. So for all intents and purposes, they're in the cloud, right? So it's actually not that big a mystery. And I find it kind of interesting that it's probably surrounded with more fanfare than it actually is.
Right. So there's a lot of definitions, and there's probably a lot of motivating factors that would make an IT manager or a CIO or some other executive say, we've got to change what we're doing right now. Our closet's not good enough. We need a closet that someone else can give us that has air conditioning and more reliable power and security and so on and so forth. Or I guess the other side of it could be that our business is not achieving its goals, or it's not set up for the future because our accounting and operational systems can't do where we see the business going in the future. So we need some sort of change, and it's not going to be on-prem. Or are there other perspectives that you hear that are...
Can I just make one distinction there?
Yeah, sure.
So kind of what you did is you took two concepts and combined them. You move from the closet, right, to an actual cloud where things are more efficient from an operational standpoint, and the need for better functionality because you've outgrown that. Those aren't one and the same.
No, those are two separate things.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that I was listening.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get out, was that those are different reasons that might spark a company to look at their existing on-prem GP and say they need some kind of a change. So, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that GP customers run into is this version, right? So we all know that Dynamics GP needs a SQL server to run on. Well, Microsoft sunsetted versions of SQL in the past year. And if you were on an older version of GP, you just hadn't gotten around to upgrading, you were forced to upgrade because it would not work on the newer versions of SQL. So it has gotten more complex and more things you have to keep an eye on if you have this in your own environment. So sometimes we find that when we help our customers move to a hosted environment, then they don't have to worry about that anymore, right? They know that someone's going to take care of the operating system and make sure that not just GP, but all of the things behind it, be it Office products, SQL Server, all of those versions all work together. Right before we had our call today, I got the notice on my laptop that new upgrades and I had to restart it. I mean, I'm sure I'm like everybody else, scared to death that when my laptop reboots, I'm not going to be able to get back on. Well, it's that same kind of complexity when you start upgrading your operating system, your Office product, your SQL Server, and GP. And so you really need people who are focused on all of those pieces and parts. And a really good hosting provider can offer that.
Karen, here's the other thing that I spoke about is, as much confusion or perhaps mysticism there is around the terminology in the cloud. Think about all the actual different nuanced options there are when you say hosted, right? Because Jason, if you think about this for a second, let's say your hardware is either trash or it's brand new, right? That you're running your on-premise solution on, right? So some people want to go into the cloud because they're at the effective end of life of some hardware, right? And so they don't want to invest in new hardware and people to run it, et cetera. Literally, what you can do is you can rent hardware space in the cloud, from Microsoft, for example, on Azure. And then you can take your licenses and you could move your Great Plains, quote unquote, into the cloud yourself, right? That's one option. What if you have a bunch of nice new hardware? You just made that investment, everything runs great, but you're really not interested in being or having an internal IT department that's running that set of servers for you. A hosted option, right? That some people call hosting, other people call co-location or some other term, is there are companies that will literally take that hardware from you and put it into their own data center and manage it for you, right? Now, again, you're in the cloud in a different version, right? And then, one of the biggest things that we've seen over the years is a lot of companies have decided that what they would do is they would manage Great Plains as a hosting partner for companies. And now, Karen being in that line of business, one of the things I've seen is there are a wide difference in approach of how companies will host Great Plains for you, right? So, for example, there are companies that I've seen that their product offering, you almost don't know you're on Great Plains, right? Because they've surrounded the Great Plains with all these different tools, right? And additional features and functions. And what they're selling you is kind of out of the box solution. So it's almost not Great Plains without all this other stuff built around it. And then, there are companies that just take exactly what you have and stick them up into the cloud, right? And then you have hosting companies like Karen runs, where you have to have that more sophisticated capability because most Great Plains on-premise have multiple ISV solutions to make them work, right? And a lot of companies have integrations with legacy systems. Well, you can't just take a generic hosting solution and, think that you're going to fit all of those business requirements. So there are different levels of sophistication and different levels of services in all of these different, ways that you could, quote unquote, take Great Plains and have it hosted. And then again, there are those big differences between companies that do the actual hosting instead of just managing your hardware for you.
Jason, that's a really good point. I mean, oftentimes when we are talking to our customers about, taking their software and moving it into a hosting site that we actually manage, they may find that just getting space, renting hardware somewhere else could be a little less expensive. But what happens is you are now dealing with IT people when you have an accounting issue. So, right, we've all been using GP and Dynamics SL for many, many years, and you get the call or an email, I got a batch stuck. Well, if you're a good support person, you know exactly what to do, how to log into SQL, how to go into the back end and clear that out. If you are with a provider that just has rented you space, They're doing their job, which is, you got to have security to do that. Can't let you in the back end. And a simple little 10, 15-minute fix turns into an hour of downtime while everybody works through the security, everybody works through the understanding. So it can be a challenge. So we have found that it is nice to work with a partner who, oh yeah, not only do we have a hosting environment, but can provide that accounting support as well. So it's just like everything else, you have to have a little bit of everything for it to work. And, by having a partner, regardless of who it is, who's monitoring that security, taking security, continuous backups, perhaps moving those backups to a different location, right? And I'm not talking the back seat of your car. I think some of us in the old days might have, had to do that once a week, take them out and put them in a safety deposit box. Well, now those backups can be stored electronically throughout the world. Heaven forbid, should there be the need to pull it from different locations. So there's a lot to think about when you want to move your GP or any accounting solution to the cloud. But if GP is working for you, hosting is really a good option, and don't overlook it, because if just getting it out of your closet is what you're looking for right now, make that move. It's kind of a good transition, right? I'm not ready to make the move yet, but I need to get it out of the closet. Well, hosting could be just that perfect middle ground.
Yeah, I would imagine if nothing else, getting it out of your own closet or even a data center of some kind is, I don't know, it's a relief from, some of the pressures that a specialist can take on for you. Things like your operating systems, like your version of SQL Server, and they can pay attention to. And, I can see that being a popular option. I mean, is that a popular option? Is there a steady stream of GP customers still kind of getting off of their on-premises, server in a closet and heading out? That, because it does seem like the most obvious sort of first step, especially if you're facing new hardware or outdated, software.
Yeah, so we're finding that it's becoming a much more open conversation, right? So years ago, you would ask a CFO, why don't you move to the cloud? And they would reply, security, right? They were concerned about security. Now, when you ask a CFO about moving to the cloud, the number one reason they want to go to the cloud is because of security. Mm-hmm. So the whole cloud environment, the understanding the technology has just got a whole lot more easier for all of us to understand the value of it. We also used to think that IT people didn't want to have accounting in the cloud, right? The CIO is not going to be happy about it. But that's just not true either. They find it to be a relief knowing that your financial data is in that kind of environment, and a CIO is now focused on strategy and strategic decisions and not doing backups. So we've found that more and more people, as the conversation becomes easier to understand and something that happens more often, more folks are comfortable in making that move.
Yeah, Karen, I got a question for you, because you guys are running a pretty good sized cloud business. Mm-hmm. I've heard, and, kind of anecdotally from my own trailing GP customer base, that your typical GP customer can have somewhere between 5 and 10 ISV solutions that they need to run their business. Is that what you guys are finding?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's so many mission critical applications, and they could be ISVs, right? We all know that certainly GP has hundreds of great ISV solutions, but they could be homegrown applications that they are pulling data, and it needs to be a two-way sync. Again, being in the cloud environment does not hinder that at all. If anything, it can support that kind of requirement. So it's a good observation.
Yeah, the two things I've heard when I've listened to GP customers talk is, like Peter said, either customization or ISV solutions and in integration to other legacy on-prem. Those seem to be the complicating factors that have come up for years in terms of why they don't change. And then the other side of it seems to be the sort of a feeling of lock-in with ISVs when they've bought an ISV solution and then the ISV their backs away or just falls way behind in what versions of GP they support. And then all of a sudden the company is, sort of locked into some old version of GP because they really rely on that add-on.
Yeah, and then you have that lack of thousands of graduates with that every year with those dexterity degrees, right? You always have that
there
issue.
There will be a subset of dexterity experts who will have a lifetime of work, I assume.
I believe so.
And then a lot of others who have, if they haven't already, will move on to AL or just to become .NET developers or whatever.
Now, one of the things that might come up in conversation if you start talking to a more sophisticated partner about hosting or taking your Great Plains into the cloud, and you want to take your existing on-premise solution, and that's a concept that Great Plains does not lend itself to what is called multi-tenancy. And that sounds very fancy and it sounds very esoteric. But Karen, if you want to comment on what that means in your data center, from it doesn't make it as easy for you to host, a lot of volume, Great Plains cheaply. But what it does is it really allows for segregated environments for you to take, your ISVs and your Great Plains solution and kind of have it in its own, container, so to say.
Yeah, so the term multi-tenant is when you think about some true multi-tenant applications, you might think about NetSuite or Intact and now Business Central and Finance and Operations. So these are software applications that really don't have a version number. You're not on NetSuite 1.0 or 2020, right? You're just on NetSuite. Business Central, you're just on Business Central because everybody has sort of that same back end. And let's talk Microsoft. They will push out those upgrades to everyone twice a year and then some other fixes in between there. But the whole idea is that everybody's on the same solution. It makes it easier to push out new features and things like that. So that's really that multi-tenant environment. And, GP and SL, it's like putting lipstick on a pig. They are client server applications. And, we're going to set them up in an Azure environment or in another core site and allow you to be able to access them through a cloud, but they are not multi-tenant applications. You still have to do an upgrade, right? You put your GP in a hosted environment. You're still going to have to upgrade to 2015, 2018, and all of the pieces and parts in between there. So I think what's exciting, Peter, is when we move on to talking about, so we've identified we do need to move. The solutions that you and I are thinking about, both the finance and operations and Business Central, are truly multi-tenant applications. And now that gets really exciting.
Yeah. And one of the other points that we really wanted to talk about, which we think is a real important and critical part of especially this discussion, if the answer to the question is, why are you looking to quote unquote upgrade? And the answer is, I want to go to the cloud, right? Mm-hmm. And your initial answer is, my Great Plains is pretty decent. It pretty much does what I need it to do. But I hear that in order to be in the cloud, I want to upgrade to Business Central, right? Taking Great Plains and moving it to Business Central is not an upgrade. Now, let me caveat that. Perhaps if, Karen, I think what you and I are referring to as, QuickBooks customers that have real simple GLAPR, GLAPAR, real rudimentary functionality, then maybe moving somebody from Great Plains to BC can be viewed somewhat like an upgrade. Of course, an entirely new, software package, user interface, et cetera. But if you're somebody that has any level of sophistication in your Great Plains implementation, right, and you're used to upgrades in GP, and you've done maybe 1, 2, 3, whatever number you have done in your life, this is not an upgrade. This literally is a move to a new ERP solution. And a move to a new ERP solution has a lot of moving parts that just cannot be shoved under the rug with the yes, but we have a great upgrade tool. And I think that's really what we want to impress on folks. If Great Plains is working for you, right, there are great cloud options for you that you should consider as opposed to, oh, yeah, let's just move it over to BC because I hear it's an upgrade. Right, Karen?
It is so true. We get amazing amount of calls and emails from our customers who say, I want to upgrade to Business Central. And you got to kind of walk them through that it really isn't an upgrade. It is a migration. It's a deployment. You've got to learn a new system. Now, Microsoft has created some really cool tools, as you pointed out, Peter, but still, you got to learn a new system. You got to take time to make sure you are going to get the results you want when you move to Business Central or any new solution. You really want to make sure you take the time to look at it. But 100% correct. It is not an upgrade.
Hey, Karen, when you have those kinds of conversations with GP customers, can you give any sort of sense of how much research they've done or how good or poor their real understanding is of what they're asking for?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about what's happening to Dynamics GP, right? Is Great Plains going away? Is GP just going to end? And while I wish I had a crystal ball and knew exactly what was going to happen, the only thing I can say is that Microsoft, based on a current maintenance plan or enhancement plan, guarantees a life cycle of their product. So you don't have to fear that, oh my gosh, tomorrow I'm going to wake up and GP is no longer going to be supported. So I think they first have to understand that Microsoft doesn't operate that way. You know, GP may eventually go away. I think we all might think that, but there's no date and there's no reason to get all panicked about that. So I think that's the first thing we try and do, Jason, is help them understand that they don't have to make an immediate decision about their GP. And then I think there's a lot of marketing material that just says, if you're on Great Plains and you want to move to the cloud, your natural choice is Business Central. And Microsoft has spent a lot of money, a lot of dollars creating a really nice migration tool where you can take data from your GP and move it over to Business Central. And again, that is going to work for data, but not necessarily for strategy and strategic and that vision, is the solution the right one for me?
And Karen, I think even understanding the capabilities and limitations of that upgrade tool is a real important value that you can have, giving somebody that is considering this, because, none of these things do everything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're finding a lot of interest, Jason, in the intelligent cloud, and we try to help our GP customers think about the intelligent cloud as just a way to kind of put their toe in the water when it comes to Business Central. So we're a professional services organization. We use Dynamics SL. Solomon have for many years. We're in our own hosted environment. We use Power BI and the intelligent cloud. So it's a really exciting time to be in the Microsoft family, but you really do want to make sure you take the time and analyze what is the right next step for you.
Hey, Jason, whenever anybody asks me if Great Plains is going away, I always tell them that there are literally thousands of Novell networks still out there.
Yep.
And I believe it was like 5 years ago that there was some poll that came out, some study in Europe, that the vast majority, over 50% of SMB accounting systems were still DOS-based, right? So I think people forget that there is this, inherent installed, inertia to systems, right? And no matter how much we'd like everybody to migrate, lockstep into something new and exciting that we have, not everybody does so.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to appreciate from my perspective when you talk to individual members of IT teams at individual companies and you hear their stories, and every single one has challenges or has reasons why it's not easy to go from where they are today to something new and different. So it's always about overcoming those challenges, unless it's really driven by the leadership of the company to really, pull or push or whatever, kind of carry the company forward in some way. Karen, I wanted to just get back and touch on one thing. You mentioned the intelligent cloud, and I think what you're talking about there is that sort of interim offering that can take data from GP or SL, or I think NAV too, right? And put it into a cloud instance of kind of a read-only cloud instance of Business Central. Is that the intelligent cloud that you're referring to? And it gives you access to then reporting and analytics based on your data, but not really operational features.
Yeah, that's correct. And why we're seeing a lot of interest in that, Jason, is that if you can get it into the intelligent cloud, then you can start to leverage the other, Microsoft platform tools like Power BI and, those kinds of really cool IT applications that come with Business Central by being out there, or finance and operations in the cloud. And, it's just like anything else, right? They all excited about it, get it set up, and they're not always using it. So we try and do regular little training sessions to say, hey, have you looked at this? But it typically refreshes every evening. And so every day, when they show up, they get some new Power BI reports. And I think that eventually they're going to start to get excited about it. But I couldn't agree with you more, Jason. It's going to take more than just a little bit of, wow, that's a cool report in order for people to make the move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where do we go from here with this podcast, guys? So we talked about some nice specific scenarios and considerations when it comes to GP and an interest in cloud and what that can really mean. I think we still need to talk about we need to talk a little more about Business Central, I think, maybe in a future episode. Yeah,
we've got the logical conclusion to this and our, kind of our last planned episode for this. If the question is, why do you want to upgrade, right? The answer is, hey, we've outgrown it. Our business requirements, right? For whatever reason, we have outgrown the limits of what GP can do for us. It's not a matter of cloud. It's not a matter of hardware. It's holding us back. We need to do something new. And I think the biggest value that Karen and I have identified is that for various reasons, there's not a lot of interplay in the Dynamics world between D365 and BC partners, right? There's a lot of historical, things behind that. But we think that, as folks that are committed to ERP solutions in the Microsoft world, one of the biggest values and one of the, the biggest things that a Great Plains customer that's outgrown their software should take a look at is, do those new requirements that we have as a company map on to Business Central, or does it result in us just making a sideways move and we're still in a straitjacket with new software, right? But we've been told all this great stuff, and we think, magically we're in the cloud, it solves all our problems, when it really doesn't. And how do you compare and contrast the difference between stepping up to a more, a bigger enterprise solution like F&O? And that's where Karen and I really, that's that last piece of the puzzle where we really think that we can add a tremendous amount of value by being able to compare those applications side by side for critical functionality. And, at a high level, that's what we want to talk about next, is those really, high level critical differences between, enterprise level ERP software. How does Business Central handle it? How does, F&O handle it?
Great. Well, I really look forward to having that conversation with both of you. Thank you so much for joining me once again today to talk about this topic. Karen, great to have you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Always a pleasure. Great talking to you again, Peter, as well.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Jason.
All right. We'll be talking again soon. This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Peter and Karen for joining once again. If you have any comments or want to get in touch, reach out by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com, or you can follow us on Twitter @msdynamicsworld. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.